Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's session, the CIA's Learning System. This is CIA Part 2, Questions and Answers, Tips, and Practice Questions. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Marie Lilly with the IIA, and I'll be your host for today's webcast. And we're going to have some interactive practice questions today, and we will be happy to take any questions that you have during the session. A couple housekeeping items before we start. Down at the bottom of your console, we put a little quiz in for you. We'd love to hear your answers. Have you taken the Part 2 exam yet? Have you ordered the materials? And go ahead and let us know about that. Also, when we get to the end of today, you want to make note of the discount code. That's on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, and that discount code is good until July 31st. So you want to write down that discount code. It's Part 2. Okay? On the upper right-hand side, you've got a picture and some bio information about our speaker today, Laura DeLuca, and you've got a copy of the slides. You've also got some resources, and you've got a copy of the evaluation questionnaire. And on the bottom right-hand side, you've got an Ask a Question pod. So feel free to put any of your questions in there, and we'll get to as many as we can during the session. Now, in the center top area of your console, that's where you're going to see the PowerPoint. And on the upper left-hand side, normally you would see our presenter, Laura, but today is, and this isn't the first time it's happened today, today happens to be a kind of silly tech day. So we're having a little video issue with Laura, but you can hear her loud and clear. So without further ado, I am going to turn the program over to Laura.
Great. Thanks, Marie. Welcome, everyone. And yes, my sincerest apologies. This is Laura speaking, that I do not have my video functioning. It's funny, you know, as fellow auditors, you'll appreciate this. So controls were in place to make sure we connected early. It worked at first. At first go, I exited my browser, and then it didn't work anymore. So as good auditors, I just want to tell you that, yes, we had controls in place, but unfortunately, they failed. So I thought you might appreciate that. Anyways, as your facilitator really today, your, I'm going to say your coach, your mentor, whatever you'd like to refer to it as, I'm really hoping that we have a fantastic discussion about all things CIA exam, specifically as it relates to Part 2. You know, this is such an amazing certification, and I absolutely appreciate, as a CIA myself, that going through the process in itself may be challenging at times, but hopefully with these tips and tip sessions and, of course, the learning system itself will help you get through to the finish line, and that's really what this is all about. So we'll talk a little bit about the Part 2 exam syllabus in terms of kind of the main topics, what to expect. Then we'll move into study and test taking tips. So that's where we'll talk about how can you prepare yourself for success. And I know that phrase probably in some ways is overplayed, overdone, but the reality is preparation is key. You're likely familiar with that term, fail to plan, plan to fail, and that certainly applies in the CIA exam series. We need to make sure that we're prepared, and we prepare by having a detailed plan so that we know what we're going to study when, on what days, and how we prioritize that, because we're all very busy professionals, so that, again, we can get to that finish line and achieve the certification that we're all seeking. We'll talk about some strategies and looking at multiple choice questions. So we have a couple of practice questions in here for you today. And then we have opportunity for general Q&A, as well as a little bit of administrative to-dos at the very end. So let's talk first then about that syllabus. So when it comes to Part 2 of the CIA exam series, this exam is 120 minutes in length, and there are 100 questions on it. Now, one of the most common questions I get when I'm delivering a prep session for the CIA exam is, Laura, how many questions will there be of each part? Fair, very fair to raise that, to ask that. And, you're actually provided with a bit of a guide in that. So 20% of the exam is dedicated to the theme managing the internal audit activity, 20% to planning the engagement, 40% to performing the engagement, and 20% to communicating engagement results and monitoring progress. Now, we could leave it there, but that's not really much of a tip or a strategy to help you on your way. So let's talk a little bit about what would be involved or what each part kind of encompasses for you. When we look at that first part, the 20% that's dedicated to managing the internal audit activity, this is really speaking to what the chief audit executive is responsible for. Now, you might say, well, Laura, I'm not a chief audit executive. How would I ever pass that part? Or maybe you are, and you feel like this is a test of your career. Regardless of what perspective you have coming into this exam, what you really need to recognize here is, to me, this is really about the ways of working and the methodology, in many cases, that you're already accustomed to or that you see. For example, in managing the internal audit activity, we're talking about the fact that the chief audit executive is really responsible to assess risk throughout the organization, to engage with stakeholders, senior management, to set up an audit plan, okay, and to have a basis for what actually goes on that audit plan and gets submitted for approval. So managing the internal audit activity, yes, maybe the accountability is with the chief audit executive, but I want you to always think about this element of part 2 from the perspective of, okay, how does the process work where I'm employed or where I am an internal auditor? One of the best study tips I could give for this section, in fact, probably many of the sections, is to almost create a bit of a flow chart. So I know in one of the review sessions, I asked my attendees to do just that. I want you to map out how the flow of internal audit works. They said, what do you mean, Laura? Well, I said, start from the very beginning. How does an audit get on the plan? What is that based on, right? Risks of the organization, the scoring of those risks, and then a prioritization of coverage based on where there are the most significant risks. And then walking through and the assignment of the engagement to capable and proficient auditors, the actual planning of the engagement, right, and so on and so forth. So really, when it comes to managing the internal audit activity, really think about it from the perspective of those high-level methodology or policy documents you might have in your internal audit team that kind of describe how the audit cycle works. And I think that's a great first step to make the most of understanding that element of the syllabus. Second, we have planning the engagement. So you'll see that this is at 20% as well. So what does that actually mean? Well, planning the engagement is when you, when I, when the person next to you or below you on the attendee list gets assigned an engagement, right? So what do we have to do? We have to understand what are the risks associated with the area under review. We draft objectives and scope, right? And we meet with the actual business area, the client area, and we get some clarification. We familiarize ourselves with how it all works, and we kick off the actual engagement. So that element of the exam syllabus is very much focused on those standards, the standards that indicate that we as auditors need to establish objectives. We need to establish a scope. We need to communicate these with the stakeholders, and we need to absolutely have a work program, or in other words, an audit plan at the engagement level. The third element of the exam syllabus is performing the engagement. Now, do you see the number here? It's not 20. Everything else is 20%. This is 40%. So if we had reaction tools in here, I would say, hopefully here I could get those surprise or those shock eyes, because that's double every other section. What does that mean? It means you really need to focus your attention on how to conduct the actual core of the audit. What does that mean? That means that's beyond the plan, right? So again, picture that flow chart. That's why that's so important, how the audit cycle actually works. here in performing the engagement, we're talking about the standards, and you can anticipate questions around how to actually execute the work. So what can you expect in that section? Well, questions around documenting information, questions around the quality of evidence, questions around what analysis and evaluation really means from the perspective of the auditor. I think about quality, right? I think about the ability to conclude based on the appropriate criteria and being able to kind of see the gap. So many of you are likely familiar with concepts like the 5 C's, or to maybe just for the purposes of our quick session today, I'll just kind of highlight. Normally, what do? We assess, we look at criteria in an engagement, and we try to compare that criteria to what's actually operating, how things are actually working in the business area or the client area we're auditing. So as part of performing the engagement, it's really about analyzing and evaluating that gap. Why is that happening? So it's no surprise then, because that really becomes the basis for our results, that would comprise the largest part of Part 2 exam. Now, one thing I don't want to overlook here, which is extremely important, is the concept of sampling, right? So whether it be considerations of sampling when we're planning the engagement because we have to develop a work program, or the actual application of sampling, that topic is absolutely fair game and an expectation for Part 2 because it is part of the engagement. Finally, we get to our last element on Part 2 here, and that is communicating engagement results and monitoring progress. So what does that actually mean? This is at 20%. So far, you could almost draw a bit of a bell curve here. What do you have? You have kind of the overarching policies, how internal audit works is 20%, so that's kind of at the lower level. We have planning still at the 20%. And then what do we have? That spike around performing the engagement. And then again, we have a little bit lower coverage on communicating results and monitoring. Now, it doesn't mean that this topic isn't important, because oftentimes we take for granted how critical this stage of the audit is. Sure, we might want to make sure that we plan it really well, we perform the engagement with adequate quality, but if we aren't able to actually communicate the results and do so with quality, which is really what's at the core of the underlying standards to support this, then my goodness, what has our work been for? And so that's really what you see as a highlight in the learning system to support the CIA exam in this section, is really an emphasis around the quality of communication and what that actually means. Also, Standard 2500 becomes a core basis for this section of the exam of monitoring progress, which really speaks to the need for, once again, the Chief Audit Executive to be able to track, have a mechanism in place to track and follow up on any action items that were agreed upon with management at the close of the audit. So you can see, if you take a step back and you look at what's on this listing of items in Part 2, can't you see that this is really about doing the work? For those of you, if you've already completed Part 1, so maybe some of you have, if you've already completed Part 1, you know that Part 1 was very foundational in nature. It talks a lot about the attributes of who we are as auditors and how the organization, the internal audit organization, is made up. The difference is what here? We're about executing the work, right? So it's more around, I would say, the technical know-how of rolling out and executing the audit. So here are some things to think about. First, Part 2 is aligned with the IPPS. You probably already understood that from the way I was describing what each of those core components represented. Because what did I do? I actually brought in some standard references when I was speaking to them. So please don't lose sight of that of course Part 2 is not this general theory of sound practice and internal audit. Sure, it's sound practice, but it's sound practice because it's based on the IPPS. So at the very core of the exam, like all the other ones, we see a reference back to the application of the standards. There are the 4 domains that I just went through with you. And of course, the focus is on performance standards. So just like I mentioned a moment ago, okay, on the first part, you were focused more on the attribute standards. Now you're focused more on the performance standards. The other item that I didn't already bring up is the concept of the chief audit executive's responsibility at the close of the audit. And that's really about, what is the risk at the end of the day? Once the engagement has actually been executed, what is the residual risk? And their responsibility to communicate that. So most of us see that in terms of risk ratings. I encourage you to break open your methodology wherever you're working, your policies, your procedures. Read through the risk ratings. Read through the definitions on the reports you use, and you'll see a mapping or a link to much of the theory we're going through here, and that if you do pursue the CIA learning system, hopefully we might be able to talk about that together further. Another thing to think about is Part 2, I always feel like, is the element or the section of the CIA exam that really deep down, okay? And I'm smiling. I wish my video was working because I'm smiling here ear to ear because I do remember writing the CIA exam myself very clearly, all parts of it. And what I will say is as I was reading, I remember thinking, I do this. But my problem was I never really understood how it linked to the standards. So as we talk about study tips momentarily, please take note of that, okay? A couple of times I'll be indicating how important it is to actually just try and relate this material back to what you do and the methodology and the policies that are readily available to you in your day-to-day work. So without further ado, let's talk about some of those tips, shall we? So study and test-taking tips. So first of all, from a studying perspective, you have to choose your study method. So you can't say, okay, Laura DeLuca said, set a plan, do this every day for half an hour, and then on the weekends, do it for 4 hours. That might not work for you. That actually doesn't even work for me, using that as an example. You have to use a method that makes sense. I can't tell you how many times I've met with and I've talked about this exam with different candidates, and everyone has a different approach because of their schedules, right? Some people love electronic means to study. Other people said, I hate listening to audio to study. Some people say, I love, pen and paper, so to speak. I like using hard copy documentation. And hands up, you can't see the video, but hands up, that's me right now. I love still pen and paper and making notes that way. So for me, my study method is around when can I be in a quiet area for 1 hour at a time and basically just rephrase and make some key notes about what I just read through. So your method, whether it's electronic, whether it's pen and paper, whether it's audio, whether it's video, all of that, can only be determined by you. The fantastic part is never before have we really had so many resources available. I don't think I had any live lectures available to me when I went through for the CIA exam. So that's a nice thing. With the CIA learning system, you really have that opportunity. You can do the self-test questions. You can use the flashcards that are available. There's also that opportunity to generate a customized study plan. And that's really what's key. And you can also attend some live prep sessions. Here's the thing. Whatever your approach is, you still do need to focus on proficiency areas. You need to understand the application because memorizing definitions, memorizing a standard will not get you far. There's only one thing I tell everyone to memorize, and it's the definition of internal audit. And I say that because, again, when you're trying to reason through situations, it always goes back to that, right? So if you have that memorized, you think, okay, how does this fit into what we do as auditors? But otherwise, even with the standards, it's not really about memorizing them. It's about recognizing the principle and being able to adapt and apply it. Now, for those of you that have never taken a computer-based test, you need to prepare for that. So I think some research, some practice in that, in understanding how that environment works is particularly important for you. It's interesting, if you look at the second bullet down on the slide, it says write an audit manual, reference ITPS. Well, that would be an equivalent in many ways, don't you think, to creating that flow chart. And again, it doesn't have to be a complicated flow chart, but almost like a block diagram. It's kind of my lazy approach to a flow chart. And I would make references all along the way. Why does this have to happen at this stage in the audit cycle? Also, just consider real-life examples. So if you can think of a time when maybe an audit didn't go as efficiently or as effectively as you would have hoped, why? If there was an issue in maybe concluding on your results and the reviewer of your file pushed it back to you and said, I don't think there was enough testing here. Think back to that. Why? And compare it to the material in part 2, and hopefully those examples will resonate with you. Let's talk a little bit about the test-taking tips. So on the test-taking side, again, we're all going to differ in terms of how we actually take tests. But there are some, I think, common approaches that benefit us all. So, for example, many of us, when we take multiple choice questions or multiple choice-based tests, we doubt ourselves. You know, I can't see hands, but if there was a poll right now, I would love to poll. How many of you doubt yourself when you take a multiple choice test? And I would probably see the majority as a positive response saying, yes, we do. I doubt myself. And it's interesting, you know, that's probably one of the greatest challenges when it comes to this type of exam. So there's a few things you can do. One, it says read the last sentence or question before the details. So in a multiple choice question, the question may be, okay, the details itself. So let's reframe this in a way that applies to this exam series a little bit. I would say understand what the question is before you look at the choices. So again, you know, I'm actually running one of these IA Learning System prep sessions this week with the IIA. And we went through a practice question last night in that prep session. And it was really interesting because there were individuals who knew the answer, the correct answer, but the way they actually read the question, they were looking for a different type of answer. In other words, they didn't really recognize what was trying to be conveyed, like what the real question was. So instead of focusing on, let's say, independence, they were focused on proficiency or something like that. That was a part 1. Same thing can apply to part 2 and eventually part 3. So really make sure you actually understand what is the sentence, what is the question. Then go on, okay, and read the choices. Why? Because for those of us that second guess ourselves, right, if we read and we understand what the question is before we read the choices, I call it anticipating the answer. So you anticipate the answer before you get into the details of the choices. So to me, it's less likely that you'll miss out on the right answer, especially if you've done all the studying that I just talked about. You'll also want to look for what I call as all-encompassing or exaggerator words. I don't know if that's the proper terminology, but that's what I always call them in exam prep sessions. So look for clues like all, except, not, you know, those are, never is another one, always is another one. When you see words like that, there are very few circumstances, if any, that would be so complete or such a guarantee. You know, this comes up sometimes with control, right? We never provide complete assurance. So you can think about it from that perspective. If you were to see a question, it had a perfectly written control, but then it said something like, will always mitigate the risk, you know right away it's wrong because there's not a completeness element or a guarantee when it comes to controls. Also, when you're reading through the material, let yourself think, okay? So here it says answer broadly and globally beyond your experience in industry. So sometimes when we read a question, we're just so quick to react, okay? Like actually pause and think, what is the real question here? What is the answer likely to be? And then move on to the choices. Sometimes we confine ourselves to our experience. And, I'm sure everyone has fantastic experience, but the reality is the exam is about what? The IPPF-based standards, not about your methodology at work. So that's a really important qualifier to understand. You're being examined based on the framework. Not every internal audit department out there perfectly or completely adheres to the standards. So please keep that in mind. You're being tested on this content. The nice thing with multiple choice is, you've probably heard this before, as soon as you get through the choices, eliminate what's an obvious distractor, those wrong answers, get them out of the way. Trust your gut or your first impression. Don't overthink, and remember the strategy to get around that. Anticipate the answer before you get to the choices. If you're uncertain, answer it anyway. Flag it for review later. Why would you want to do this? 1, it helps with time management. 2, the reality is you get more tired, right, as we work through an exam. So let's answer it live, and then we'll flag it for review later. Budget your time. Don't rush. So that's where the study plan becomes really critical to me. And the CIA learning system has an opportunity, a function there. I can't remember what it's called exactly. I think it's exam simulation or simulate the exam environment, but I know that there's a tool in there that allows you to kind of practice more of that exam-like scenario. So again, that's really important because I've done it. I'm sure other people have done it. You practice and you study in a very different type of environment than what reality will be like for the exam. So wherever possible, try to mirror that environment. Also, be well rested. Be comfortable for the exam. It is not the night to stay up all night before your exam. That's my personal advice. Your cognitive ability will decline significantly, and if you're like me, you're not 20 anymore. So getting a good night's rest will be especially important as you get to your exam. So let's talk about some practice questions. So we'll begin with
you,
one.
Laura. Yeah, go right ahead. I've displayed that for the folks.
Thank you. So we have our first one up there. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think through that, and then we'll talk about it. So the question is, which best describes the professional practices component of internal audit operations at the optimizing level?
Okay, we'll give folks a little bit of time to make their selections. And you're going to be seeing those polling questions in the same area where you see the PowerPoint slides. And so you'll have your choices available for you. And you may need to scroll down a little bit to see all of the responses. Okay, and we're seeing that the poll is not being active. All right, let's see what kind of technical issue we have here. All right, I'm going to refresh on my end. Let's see what we've got. All right. Yeah, it might be, we're not seeing that everyone has an issue. So it might be isolated. So you might need to refresh your screen. If you're on a PC, that's function F5. If you're on a Mac, it's Control R. And it's looking like everyone's got 100%. And Laura, are you able to see the results?
I cannot see results.
Oh, yes, you are on phone. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we've got 100% to the response that is continuous improvement, internal audit integration in risk management infrastructure, specialty skills program.
Wonderful. That is great news, Marie, because it looks like we're all ready to write the exam. That's the perfect answer. So that is great. I was worried when Marie said it's 100%, and then I wasn't sure what the option was going to be. I thought, oh, so that's good. That means, hey, we can all celebrate. We're one step closer to the exam, so give yourself a pat on the back. That's absolutely right. Yes, good work. Continuous improvement, internal audit integration, and risk management infrastructure, specialty skills program. Yeah. So, I guess really, let's take this a step further for a second, okay? So when you're thinking about optimization levels, I really just think about maturity models overall. So remember, it's important to kind of think broader and to kind of try and gain whatever you can or glean whatever you can from different practice questions you complete. So here's a great example of if you can relate it to something you're maybe comfortable with, so maybe you're comfortable with maturity models in your employment, then seeing something like an optimization level likely would have led you, even if you didn't remember the exact content or what this is reflective of in the internal audit activity, would have led you to those keywords around continuous improvement, right? Or specialization. So again, this is why in the previous slide or two, it had that comment to say, try to think broader, because I think that's the reality when you're on the exam too, is we're going to forget things. And no one is perfect. We know that. Nor are we looking for perfection, but can you reason? So reasoning ability is, I think, so important when you're going through these exams. Great. Okay, let's try another one.
Okay, and I'm going to do some troubleshooting in the back. I'm going to put this to display in the pop-up window. Please let me know if there's still some issues with folks being able to see this second poll. And this is called planning the engagement. I will tell you this has been a technologically challenged day for not only this session, but other ones. So hopefully we can see what's going on out there. All right, let me take a look at a preview. Okay. All right, I'm starting to see some come in. Okay. Let's see, we'll give folks about 30 more seconds or so. Okay, so you should see a pop-up window now in the center of your screen. You may need to move it over to that media player area to see the words, but I'm able to submit my answer. So hopefully folks will be able to do that, and let's give it a little more time. Okay. All right, it looks like we've got some good responses. I'm going to push those out.
Great.
And
I see them this time.
Let's see what we've got for results. Yep. Okay.
So
and here's our
results.
You can, very good, because now it's in a pop-up. Okay, so there's your results. Looks like about 77% internal audit management.
Perfect. Thanks, Marie. Whatever you did, it worked. So I can see everything.
Okay, good.
Great. Yes.
Very good.
So internal audit management, yes. So B is the correct answer. So excellent work, 76.6. That's a passing grade in my mind, yeah. So that's good. So let's talk a little bit about why, okay? Why is an internal audit management? So here's a great question to really think about. What is it asking? It's asking about the engagement work program. Engagement work program. So again, if you pause and you reflect on the question, it's talking about what we're going to accomplish at the engagement level, not the overall audit plan for the year or the quarter, right? It's not talking about draft objectives and scope that we get management agreement on. It's what? It's our plan for how we will conduct the testing to accomplish the audit objectives. And so by understanding that, we recognize that internal audit management would be the party to actually approve this. So again, here's a great example. If you go back to your own policies and your methodology at your place of employment, you would likely see something similar, a review and approval process for your engagement or your audit plan, again at the engagement level, prior to being able to commence testing. This is really just supporting both planning the engagement, but here's a hint for you. It'll also come up for a standard later on called engagement supervision. Good. Okay, let's try another one.
Okay, here's the next one. And I can go back to that first one later if you like, Laura, and pull that up as a pop-up so people can take that again. So let's go through a couple of these, and then we can go back to that other one if you like. This is on performing the engagement. So that should be showing, again, as a pop-up. Maybe want to move that over a little bit to the black area under Media Player. You've got cost-benefit analysis, specific audit procedures to be used, expert audit judgment required, or evaluation of the appropriateness of the evidence obtained. Those are your choices. And I'm going to click on one just so I can make sure that's coming in. All right, I'm seeing that. And yeah, we've got responses coming in. Thank you, everyone. About 5-6 more seconds. All right, very good. Let's display those results. And Laura, you should see that in your pop-up.
Thank you. So this one is a more challenging question. I will say that based on my experience working with what feels like hundreds, if maybe even thousands of candidates over the last few years, sampling is a bit of a trickier topic. Okay, so I'm not surprised to see maybe a little bit lower in terms of a performance on this question. However, the correct answer is A, cost-benefit analysis. So let's ask ourselves why. And if you got that right, congratulations. If you got it wrong, that's okay. Let's figure out why. So the question here is about the choice to use statistical or non-statistical sampling techniques. Now, I guess, it would be cost-benefit analysis first and foremost, because really sampling is considered to be, when we think about statistical sampling, it is considered to be the most reliable, given its basis on the laws, statistics, the laws of probability, et cetera. We typically also get, I'm going to say, a higher amount of coverage, right? Because typically you'll get a higher sample, you'd actually be pulling more than you would if you would be using non-statistical sampling, if you run it through a statistical calculator. So it normally is a cost-benefit analysis. The choice to use statistical or non-statistical sampling is independent of the audit procedures to be used, or what perhaps more important is that it's independent of our evaluation, right? Our evaluation happens after we actually gather the evidence, then we're analyzing and reviewing it. In terms of whether you're using statistical or non-statistical sampling, we're always using professional judgment. That never really goes away. In fact, something to keep in mind is even with statistical sampling, you'll often have to identify key items, or we call them, extraordinary items, and you have to pull them or stratify them before you can perform random samples. Otherwise, you'd have errors when you extrapolate to your population. So just kind of keep that in mind as you think through sampling. Okay. Let's go to our last question. And I don't think we'll go back to the first one, Marie, because I was thinking about that. I think we want to keep that win at 100% now that we know the answer.
Okay.
So that'll be our win for today. Let's go to the last one.
Okay. This one is on communicating engagement results and monitoring progress. And you should see that as a pop-up as well. You've got 4 choices there. The scope statement may be combined with the objectives. Findings in the interim report must be included in the final report. The use of interim reports eliminates the need for a final engagement communication, or the final presentation to the client requires a written document. So go ahead and make your selection if you would. Let's make sure that's showing on everyone's screen. Yep, I'm seeing it as a pop-up. All right, we'll give folks a little bit of time to make those selections. And we're seeing those coming in. Thank you very much. And while we're waiting, we do have a question, Laura. Does taking the CIA exam or all of the exams count as CPE?
So actually, it's interesting that you asked this question. I was just going through the CPE policy for the IIA yesterday. So I guess what I would say is my answer has to be somewhat vague here. It really depends on who you are reporting your CPEs to, but I'll pick a couple of certifications. So for example, if you're a member of the IIA and maybe you have other certifications, then examinations are often included as part of that. You need to check the policy for the way that that's calculated. The same thing if you're an accountant. The PD hours would typically consider the exam and some studying leading into that as part of the CPE hours you can report. The same with some other, like IT specialty certifications, et cetera. But I'm so hesitant to answer it kind of as a blanket response for all certifications out there because, again, I mean, I think of myself, I have a few of them, and I always have to check with my CPE policy because the way it's counted does differ between certifications. Okay? So apologies for the vague answer. I guess my short answer is likely yes. How many hours, I'm unsure.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, let's display the results of this last practice question.
Okay, great. So thanks for that. Which statement regarding engagement communications is true? Wow, this might be a surprise to you. A is the true statement. So a lot of us are probably used to reporting objectives and then scope separately, but in reality, the scope may be combined with the objectives. So, for example, I'm trying to think of one. So, for example, you might say that you're going to review all complaint. So you might have as an audit objective that you're going to assess the effectiveness or the timeliness of response to all customer complaints according to Regulation X during the period January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. So you can see that kind of the time period of the scope, the activity, right, it's actually part of that objective statement. So that's what we mean when we say the scope statement may be combined with the objective. Now, for the second one, findings in the interim report must be included in the final report. It actually, the findings in the interim report do not need to be included in the final engagement communication. The final presentation to a client does not require a written document, and findings in the interim report may be excluded. So, for example, I went through this just recently. I'll be careful I don't go off on a tangent here. I went through this where something was reported in the interim to the business area, the client, and it was resolved. Residual risk was actually lower, so it actually did not become a finding in the final report. There was a slight reference to it in the appendix to just kind of acknowledge that something had come up and cleared, but it didn't get its regular attention, if you will, or real estate that you might expect. Okay, so let's just, I think we have, okay, time for our questions now. So how is the CIA challenge exam different from the standard exam? So my understanding on the challenge exam, and I think we can probably provide you with a link to, and I'm sorry I don't have all of my links readily available, but maybe others do who are on the call with me. But when it comes to the actual challenge exam, it's in place of taking all three parts of the exam. So the way I view it is as a concentrated delivery of the content. That's my interpretation of it, and I believe that there's going to be another one in the fall, September, if I'm not mistaken. I can actually try and find the link and put it into the chat area if we're able to do that. I don't know if we are, Marie, at all.
Yeah, we will get that out to folks.
Perfect. Good. Thank you.
Okay, we do have some more questions coming in. Would you like me to pop some of them up for you?
Okay, so I see some questions, sorry. Okay, so here's the first one that I'll kind of maybe just address, and that is, will you please explain the exam scoring? What score do I need to pass? So your score is calculated based on the number of questions that are answered correctly, and then that's converted to a scale. The scale is between 250 to 750 points. Your target, okay, for passing is a score of 600.
Okay, thank you.
Another question that might be popular right now for you, or you're thinking about as we kind of have lived through this pandemic, is will I be able to test from home throughout this year? So yes, the option to test from home is still available in most locations. So again, if you go to the IA certification website, you should be able to find more information on that. Here's one of my favorite questions. Do you recommend I take an instructor-led course? Will it help me pass? Well, you know what the challenge is here. I am one of those instructors. So I think, yes, you should. I do think you should, because we have fantastic conversations. Again, you know, it does depend on your study preference, your availability, and all of that. But just to kind of give you an example, you know, last night, it was so amazing. We went through one of those instructor-led sessions, and just to give you an idea, we're just under 20 people in that session. And the amount of questions, like just the amount of discussion that we were able to have was amazing. And so I feel like even though the content can be read on your own, even for me, every time, I just think it's amazing the examples that are shared, the details, the granularity that people see. It's nice. And it helps keep you on track. That's always my perspective as well. Let's see what we have here.
Yeah, Laura, if you're looking at some questions and just want to start reading the question that came in for me, I could push that out to the audience so they can see it as well.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Do you want to push one out?
Yeah, let's see. We've got a couple of questions about all different kinds of things. Let me see here. Here we've got someone asking that their online access has expired. Is there a way to extend?
Okay. Yes, you can apply for an extension. So this is where you have to go to the Learn CIA website, learncia.com, and the direct link is /extension.
Okay, thank you.
Understand. Yeah.
Here's a question about time. How much time do you recommend that I study for each part?
So it does depend on your familiarity, right, with the standards. So again, an example, if you are working in the function as an auditor and as part of the policies or the methodologies you use, there's a lot of reference to the standards, then you're likely going to be more familiar with those standards and be able to explain them. So you need to gauge kind of your familiarity. Everything's based on the IPPS, but overall, when it comes to this specific part, the recommendation is a minimum of 40 hours. I would say that even being like a former quality assurance lead, I would still spend 40 hours, and I feel rather comfortable with the standards just because you have to be in a particular state of mind to get ready for the exam as well.
Okay, thank you. And here's one about the questions. Will the questions in the study materials be the same as on the exam?
No. I received that twice this week, actually, so that would make me smile. I wish you could see my face. I get that question a lot. No, I'm going to answer it this way. It's not. I understand why that might feel beneficial. It's a closed book exam, and doesn't it feel special, right, to get a certification? And I think, oh my goodness, if it was almost too easy to get, right, or if these questions weren't challenging, if the CIA exam was rather open book and it was pulling from a generic test bank, my goodness, it would be maybe not as satisfying in the end as professional. So quick answer is no, it's closed book. That really speaks to the integrity of the profession and the certification. But those prep materials, if you go through those questions, they'll help you because, again, you're covering the topics, one, and two, what are you doing? You're kind of mastering your test-taking techniques, and that's what's important.
Thank you. Here's a question about the order of the exam parts. And the question is, do I need to take the exam parts in sequential order?
No, you do not. So, for example, if someone has recently graduated from an undergraduate program from a college or university, and that relates to so let's say it's business focused, accounting focused, they might do quite well actually starting with part 3 because it feels like a little mini MBA, I call it. It kind of covers many of those business topics, especially accounting. So that might make sense, whereas someone maybe who has been in internal audit for quite some time may have a greater level of comfort with what we're just talking about today, part 2, and the actual process.
Okay, good advice. Here's another question for advice. When I'm taking the online practice quizzes, what percentage of a score, or what score do you recommend I achieve to know when I'm ready for the exam?
There is a recommendation to be in the 90th percentile. My only caveat to that is please make sure that it's not because you've memorized the answers, because you've done this so many times. So being in the 90th percentile because you truly are understanding the content, not because it's memorization. Because in response to the previous question I had, remember it's closed book, right? So those questions aren't coming from the same bank, so memorizing won't help you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Here's a language question. Someone's asking or saying that they registered for the exam and they plan to take it in French, but they also see that the question's in English while I'm taking the exam. Can they see them in English?
Yes, you can switch between or toggle between the languages. So that's the nice thing about the exam structure.
Oh, nice. Okay, thank you. Got another question here. If I don't pass all exam parts in 3 years, do I have to start all over again?
Yes. And so you might wonder, okay, well, why? Is that fair? Is that unfair? We have to remain relevant. Remember that. That's actually the very core of the IPPS, is that we're competent we remain current in our knowledge, and the reality is the applications change, right? I think about even just some of the changes that happened between version 6 and 7. And so if you don't pass all parts in 3 years, you do need to start over. And again, it's really about maintaining the reputability of the profession.
Okay, thank you. This has to do with availability in someone's area. They'd like to enroll in a class, but there isn't one offered in their area. Is there another option?
So you can listen or attend one of the online options. So I don't know if you've ever had a chance to look at those, but if you go to learncia.com, you'll see references to different online classes available. And hey, I would love to have you there if I happen to be the instructor at one of them. The virtual environment can be highly interactive, so please don't take that for granted. If you are in person, that's great if you have something in your area. If you don't, you can do it from the comfort of your home with children and pets and everyone else around you, and still get the coverage you need.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question before you may want to wrap up and have any closing words for our folks. But this person is asking if they can purchase the study materials before they're qualified to sit for the exam so they can get started.
So you can go ahead and purchase the materials ahead of time. In fact, it's a great window or opportunity, sneak peek. I can't think of the right word for you, of what's to come. So I would actually recommend it. The nice thing about buying the learning system overall is that we just talked about the ability to take the exam in different parts. So wouldn't it be amazing if you could have a preview of what's in there, and then you can kind of choose what you want to have to focus on and which courses you want to take first if you're doing an instructor-led. So I actually think that there's a huge opportunity there for you.
Okay, terrific. Okay, well, let me move to a wrap-up, I guess, and information about the 20% savings. Perfect.
Good. So you attended this session. Thank you. Thanks for being with myself and Marie and Kelly, who's an executive with the CIA system. The one thing I will just kind of convey to you is you have an advantage here. By attending the webinar, you do have savings that are available to you, so you may want to take advantage to that. Even if reimbursed by your employer, we all know employers like savings, right? So you may want to pass that on. Also, don't forget to just maybe take a quick snapshot of the discount code and the website so that you know you can take advantage of this offer by July 31st. From my perspective, it's been an absolute pleasure being with you today for this short time period, and I really, really do wish everyone the best and the most success in your test taking, and I really hope to see you in the next instructor-led session at some point. We'll have a lot of fun if we cross paths again, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Laura. This is all part of your handout package as well, folks. But here's the website link. If you have frequently asked questions, you can find them there. And next week, I think, or so, the replay will be available for you. Right now, I'm going to ask you to take a few minutes, and we'll leave this evaluation survey open for a while. We do love to hear your feedback. Was this helpful? What else can we do to provide assistance for you? So make sure you take a few moments, if you would. It's a very short survey, and we appreciate that greatly. Thank you all for being with us today. We appreciate your time. As Laura mentioned, I echo good luck, and let us know how we can help in the future. Thank you all, everyone. Bye-bye.